Okay, this is Steve Sherman. I think the first time I met or have heard of you was back in 2004. And that's when I moved to Lubbock, Texas to study anthropology at Texas Tech University after receiving the Gerald Hickey Scholarship that Dr. Gerald Hickey and Dr. James Reckner. Dr. James Reckner was the director of the Vietnam Center
Right.
at the time. So that's why I ended up in Lubbock, Texas, because I received that scholarship. So he and I have known each other for many years now. We have met quite a few times at these Vietnam conference where that happens yearly. And today I'm at his house visiting him. So I just want to thank you, sir, for setting up that scholarship
Well, it was my pleasure to do so.
and also recruiting 11 other former special forces to donate to that scholarship. Yeah.
Well,
I still don't know like where you're from and and when did you join the military and met the Montagnards?
I was born not born. I was born in Pennsylvania.
Okay.
My family, by the time I was in the fourth grade, was living in Lexington, Massachusetts, which is a very
okay.
historical town. And I was there through the rest of my elementary years and through my high school years. And I went to Tufts University in Medford.
Okay.
2 of those years I commuted from Lexington. When I graduated from Tufts, it was 1964.
Okay.
64, 65, I guess. Yeah. I had just gone to a summer program talking about the publishing field,
Oh,
which
okay.
is a field I wanted to be in. And I met all the people who I respected very highly in that field and heard about all the years that they had slaved away
Okay.
to get to the point where they were today.
Okay.
And at that point, the Vietnam War was sort of beginning. I had actually gone in and counter-protested to the protesters who were in Boston, marching around protesting a war they knew nothing about.
Oh, I see.
And I just said, well, I don't know anything about it either, but I can find out. And I signed up for the military with the expectation, because that's what the military promised, that if I did everything right in the first 2 programs I went to and graduated from them, I could go to officer candidate school and apply to become an officer.
Oh, okay.
And then I went to officer candidate school, and I found I could put in a little dream sheet about what I wanted to do. And I said, well, I want to be a movie producer in New York, or this other thing, which is equally as unlikely. And the third thing is I'd like to be a civil affairs psyops officer in the Highlands of Vietnam. And somehow the Army decided that I was really most qualified for that.
Oh, wow.
The other 2, they didn't really think so much about. So they sent me off to Fort Bragg to do whatever.
Was that the Special Forces
That was
training?
Special Forces, PSYOP, Special Operations. So they sent me there without specific instructions, except that I'd already gone to jump school. So I was qualified for anything. And I ended up in a PSYOPs battalion. And then at one time, the sergeant major, my sergeant major of my battalion, said, you are on orders to go to Thailand to set up a new PSYOPs unit of Thailand. However, would you like to tell your grandchildren that you spent the war in Thailand, or that you went to war in Vietnam as a Special Forces officer?
Oh.
Because I had also qualified in the meantime for Special Forces officer.
Wow.
And I said, of course I'd rather be a Special Forces officer than a PSYOPs officer in Thailand. Maybe I was a little bit off in my head at the time, but no, it was a good.
You were young, yeah.
So I ended up very shortly thereafter on orders to go to Vietnam. First on orders to go to language school, and then to Vietnam. Okay, and then to 5th Special Forces Group, and from there, they had read my little notes that came along with me, and they sent me out to Pleiku.
Wow. So what year were you in?
I was 67.
67?
I arrived about August of 67.
Okay. And how long were you in Pleiku?
I was in Pleiku for about 9 months out of that whole time.
And did you work directly with the Montagnards? Maybe the Jirai people, perhaps?
I don't know if you ever heard of Tony Kasor.
Tony, I have heard the name, but I don't know.
Tony Kasor was one of my interpreters. He spoke
Oh,
several Montagnard dialects.
okay.
I had a Vietnamese interpreter, Mr. Kim, Mr. Tien.
Tien.
No, I don't know what his name was.
Okay.
He's Vietnamese,
Mm-hmm.
and we published a magazine or newsletter for all the camps with several Montagnard dialects and Vietnamese and English.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
I would love to get those.
Well, I may have some upstairs, but not many.
Okay.
All right. And so I was there, and my original boss was Jim Morris. When he left, I became the S5. But I was lieutenant. I had 3 lieutenants underneath me
Okay.
in Khartoum, Bemitut, and Quinyan.
Oh.
And those camps, those B detachments wanted to put captains in there, but I was lieutenant at the C detachment, and that was a problem. My being a lieutenant in the C detachment was a problem.
Mm-hmm.
So finally, they decided to send a captain over there, but move me down to assistant S5.
Okay.
Which pissed me off somewhat. But they then said, "We want you to come back to the Trang. We want you to come to the Trang.
Okay.
Take an assignment within the S5 shop in the Trang. You can be the S5 plans officer. You write down everything that you did in Pleiku, so people in the other areas know what they should do." Mm-hmm. And Brian Jenkins, who had the similar job to me prior to my being there, had been up in the S5 and I Corps. And he had done a really good job. I read a lot of papers that he wrote, and I said, okay. So I went down there, and the S5 in the Trang, a nice guy, sat down, we talked, and I said, well, I got 3 more months in the military. I would like to go back to Pleiku. I will be a captain at that point when they promote me, and then I'll fit in. He said, good, I agree to that. And he had been recruited by the Army to go off and become a provincial senior advisor.
Oh, okay.
And the deal was that if he became a provincial senior advisor, his wife would be able to come to the Philippines or to Thailand. He could go off every once in a while and see her. He had to stay for 2 more years in that post. But then they would give him a reward to the Special Forces Group to command, because he'd become a full bird colonel by then. So the other guy who took his place, Colonel Weil, came in. He interviewed everybody, including me, and he asked, is there anything else you'd like to discuss? And I said, yes, I wanted to find out if my agreement with your predecessor still stands. And he says, Lieutenant, the Army tells you where it wants you. You don't tell the Army. And I said, the Army says I'm going home in 3 months. Also, it says that if I want to extend for any place in Vietnam, that they will to try their best to put me there. And I want to extend for Pleiku as the S5. It was deaf ears to him, and that was the worst 3 months of my Army career. Like, I got out.
Yeah.
However, living well is the best revenge. I went to the United States, 1968. It's a Democratic convention, the election, and all the other things that happened in 1968 were happening all around me. And I really didn't like it. Meanwhile, I've been receiving letters from companies in Vietnam, Control Data Corporation, and a couple of others, saying that they had great jobs for me in Vietnam if I wished to come back. And given that I had more than one offer, I said, I'll go to Vietnam, and I'll find out what they're doing, and I'll choose which one I want. Well, I bought my own ticket around the world, at the halfway point in Saigon. I arrived in Saigon.
So this was 68?
69.
69.
It took me January 1st, 69. I was on the beach in Hawaii watching fireworks. It took me 6 months to get to Vietnam. I wandered around through Japan, Taiwan, Hong Kong, a bunch of other Okinawa, just as a tourist. That was the nice thing about this airplane ticket. You go anywhere you wanted. And so I got to Vietnam. But at that time, Nixon had become president, and he had a meeting in Midway and said the war's over. So people were still talking about jobs, but they weren't getting them. Okay, and what I didn't realize is that the reason people were interested in me is that they were shopping around my resume, trying to sell me to the U.S. government.
Mm-hmm.
So I lived for about 2 months in the control data team house, promising to give me a job. They gave me free room and board to be there. And finally, I said, I'm going to go to the PX and see about putting boxes on the shelf or whatever they do there, just so I have something to do and I can buy my cigarettes legally, at least until you come up with a job for me. Went to the PX, and they said, gee, have we got a job for you? You can be the plans officer for a $400 million retail operation.
Wow.
You're the plans officer for Special Forces. Okay. So they made me the chief of plans and programs, a GS-15 job. And while I had friends in Special Forces in Saigon who were, one day I'm visiting with them, and it turns out this toll that I didn't like was in charge of that camp. And he looked out the window, he saw me. He told my friend, he said, what is he doing here? Don't let him come back in this compound ever again. And I was making more money than this guy was at the time. All right? So anyway, so living well is your best revenge. Yeah.
Oh, that's an interesting story.
My initial assignment in Vietnam was to the Sea Detachment in Pleiku. Our commander was a guy named Lou Feistenheimer, who was an old-timer in Special Forces.
Okay.
And he had been in Germany. He was kind of the mayor of Bad Holz when he was in Germany. He was a very gruff individual. He just died this year at age about 100, or maybe it was last year, just recently. One day he announced to everybody that we were going to have a command mess, which meant that all the officers had to be, if they're in town, had to be for dinner at a certain time. That didn't happen.
Okay.
But that's what he said. So, without any idea of what was going on, we all went to dinner.
Okay.
And nothing seemed unusual, except there's this one fellow who was sitting there at the table in a short sleeve, white shirt, no tie, open collar, white shirt, clean shaven, clean looking, a little heavy set, and soft spoken. Colonel Feistenheimer said, this person knows everything about the Montagnards in Vietnam.
Oh, wow.
You are welcome to ask him any questions you want, and I hope that you will do so. Everybody was sort of skeptical about that. And then we talked, and he was really extraordinarily knowledgeable.
Wow.
I was not the lead person at all in this at all, but I certainly recognized who he was and what he can contribute.
Yeah.
Right? And his relationship with Special Forces went back a long, long way. When Roger Donlin in 1964 received the Medal of Honor, Gerald Hickey was in his camp, hiding underneath a truck, getting shot at.
That's when the Viet Cong attacked them? Right.
So he is, new.
Is this called like the Battle of Nam Dong, right?
Battle of Nam Dong, right?
Okay.
In fact, he lost all of his notes. I think what was it, the Ka tribe that he had, the ones who were out in the middle of nowhere that nobody knew anything about.
Okay, yeah.
All his notes were lost in that battle.
Man.
He was there earlier than that. Montagnard Revolt.
Oh, yeah.
And I did a study of that one time, talked to people who were involved.
Was it 64 or 60?
64.
I think it's 64, yeah.
So Nam Dong was July of 64. This is September 64, the Montagnard Revolt. So one of the people that I knew well, who told me his story, he said that he was out at, maybe it wasn't Boon Sapar, one of the camps, the most important camp.
In Ban Minh Thuột, right?
In Chuck Darnell's camp.
Yeah.
And he was a major, Special Forces major. And the MACV colonel came in and started talking to all the Montagnards in French.
Oh.
And the leader of the revolt in the camp talked to my friend and said, he outranks you, doesn't he? My friend said, yes, he does. He said, good. We'll keep him as hostage. You go negotiate. Anyway, my friend left the camp, as he was supposed to do, went down to Saigon, and he and Jerry Hickey went to see General Westmoreland. General Westmoreland got the story of the revolt from Jerry Hickey and his commentary, and he said, get that, Colonel Freund was his name, out of there. We don't need a Lawrence of the Montagnards. So certainly Jerry Hickey was involved in so many things that happened in Vietnam, and was able to provide good advice to the people who
Yeah,
were
that's what I've
there.
heard.
He had been in Laos before. He had written the first book he wrote was on a village in Vietnam in Vietnamese, published in English and in Vietnamese. Did a very good job of the dynamics of how the village life worked, how the farmers sort of lied to each other to decide what crops they were going to grow and what they thought the other guy was going to grow and what they needed to do to get a better market than their neighbor.
Right.
Okay? And then he wrote books on the Montagnard. Okay. So at one point, I am putting together a CD about the Montagnards, and I'm using the official records from Special Forces, from the Department of Army, and from the Marines on the different tribal groups in Vietnam. And I decided I needed to make new contact with Dr. Hickey.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
But you met him in Vietnam?
I met him in Vietnam.
In Pleiku? How many times did you
There was only that one occasion I met him in Vietnam. But I was aware of him, right? And I was aware that he was in Chicago.
Right.
And so I called him up.
This was after the war?
Way
many
after
years.
the war.
Okay.
Long time. He said to me, I can't talk to you now. My publisher won't accept my new book.
Oh.
My computer has died, and my book is there inside my computer somewhere. And I'm just going, have great difficulty. I don't want to talk to you. Can't talk to you at all.
Do you know about what year was this when you contacted him?
I would have to look at the...
Like approximately.
95.
95.
And I said to him, Dr. Hickey, first of all, your book, whatever book you write, can be published, even if I have to publish it myself. But your book will be published, whatever you want. And I will assure you that. Number two, talk to me about your computer, and I'll find a way to get your book out of that computer.
Oh, wow.
Right? And it's also his printer didn't work.
Is this when you were like doing computer business kind of?
No, it was a little bit after. It was so maybe a little earlier, close to 92, 93, or maybe even earlier than that. What it was when his friend was transitioning from Berkeley to Texas Tech. I have to pull up the guy's name, but he was also a very important scholar on Vietnam. Okay, and he moved to Texas Tech. Okay, and brought all of his material to the Texas.
Oh, James Reckner.
No.
No.
Right.
Oh.
He worked for Reckner. Right?
Oh, okay.
But he was just moving. He moved over there, and I knew that Texas Tech would publish Jerry Hickey's book if he's told them to do so.
Okay.
So I was operating in firm ground. But what kind of computer do you have? Okay? He had a computer that was older than my Trash 80, the TRS 80, the Radio Shack computer.
Oh, yeah.
And he was using an antique version of Microsoft Word. And I said, send me the disk you've got, or a copy of the disk you've got it on, which he did. And I bought the software, which is cheap because nobody was ever using it. It's just old stuff. And put it on one of my old computers, and I was able to take it and transfer it into more modern files. I sent it off to Texas Tech, and they agreed to publish his book. That was good. Then I had a friend in Chicago that had worked for me when I had my equipment there, and he was a repairman on that equipment. So I sent him a word processing system that I had because I was going out of that business. And give it to Jerry and have him installed. But Jerry had it installed at his daughter's house instead of his own house, where it probably never did anything useful. But he opened up a relationship where I had a good relationship with him, and because I was able to do what I promised to do. He was having trouble, and Neil Olson wrote about how anthropology and academia were at crossroads in Vietnam. And he was really not well accepted by the anthropology community in the United States. He was financially okay, but he wasn't teaching, and he had books out there that were not being seen. And what I said, I would like to put all your books on CD-ROM. And he agreed to that. We wrote letters to all the publishers. he gave the copyright to me.
Mm.
And so I have the copyright on all the books which are on my CD-ROM.
Okay.
Okay. He was happy to have that. Thing. Plus, he was just such a personage that I had to say, well, you need to have a Gerald Hickey Scholarship. And
that's the next question I was going to ask you. How did the Gerald Hickey Scholarship Fund came about?
Yeah, it came about because of my relationship with Jerry. I thought we really need to do something. Texas Tech was the place to do it. I asked him if we have a scholarship, would in-state tuition rates apply?
Okay.
So that's, say, about $6,000 a year. So I could raise money based on a certain number. And so we want a scholarship that we can do for undergraduate, graduate, and doctorate work. And I said, we are going to have 12 special forces people contributing on a monthly basis to a scholarship, which will collect enough money. If it's $6,000 a year, 12 people, it's like $50 a month or something like that. It was very reasonable for every individual. So we put that together and collected money, and the results of the scholarship. Right. We had to maintain an arm's length between ourselves and the scholarship recipient.
Oh, yeah.
So there were certain things that we had to work on. And Jim Reckner was very good at helping us figure out how to do it. First of all, it cannot be ethnically biased.
Okay.
So anybody can apply for the scholarship.
Not just the Montagnards?
Not just the Montagnards.
Oh, I didn't know that.
But what we got from Jim Reckner was a suggestion we made that the first person had to be qualified in at least 2 Montagnard dialects.
Okay.
And that kind of limits the number of people who are available to do that. So, and we didn't know you.
Right.
We had no knowledge of you, your community.
Yeah, let me tell you what happened around, this was 2002, 2003. That's when the Save the Montagnard people and our leaders in North Carolina were telling people about this scholarship. Young people should apply for this scholarship. I applied for it. I think it was in 2003. But I learned later on that no one else had applied for it.
Well, we were lucky to get you. You did very well by us. We were very proud of having supported you in this endeavor.
Yeah.
And now your employment and the things that you do with it are very heartwarming, but it does fulfill our idea that somebody had to be there to follow up on what Jerry did.
Yeah, I regretted that I didn't get to meet Dr. Gerald Hickey at all. One point I was going to buy an airplane ticket to travel to his Chicago, right, to meet him, but somehow that didn't happen. And I really wish I met him and interviewed him and all of that. Well, but we spoke on the phone quite a few times.
That's very good.
Because he gave me advice on a bunch of things, and he was really nice.
He's not only nice, he's very knowledgeable as well.
Yeah.
And that was the thing that he was a person who could give advice to people who would accept that advice because he was such an authoritative source.
That's
right.
They
didn't argue with him. He didn't push them.
Right.
He just stated facts, and they said, "Yeah, you're right."
Yeah, because like when I talked to him on the phone, he had so much knowledge about the Montagnards, different tribes, even like specific names of our leaders. I didn't know him that well at the time. I'm like, wow, this man knew a lot. And only later on, after I read most of his books, I realized how smart he was. Yeah. So it was the work, like you, Dr. Gerald Hickey, and Dr. James Reckner. It seems like the three of you. Four of you.
The other fellow who was there. I don't really remember. He worked in the embassy.
Oh, okay.
And he would work with Bob Turner in the embassy on policy, North Vietnam policy, who they were and what they were doing. Then he went to Berkeley, and he maintained a library and wrote something called the Indochina Chronicle, which he wrote everything about Vietnam. Any books that came in, he critiqued them. And in fact, I had sent him one of the first books that I had written, or no, I didn't write it. I bought it from a guy who wrote it, and I sent him that book, and he said, the author of this book was a UPI bureau chief in Saigon.
Mm.
And this book is a short, funny little book. Neil Sheehan wrote a big, fat book, and he was also bureau chief for UPI or whatever it was. And it doesn't have as much correct history in it that this little book does.
Yeah.
Right.
Do you remember the names of the scholarship donors? I know, like Carl Reagan.
Reagan was one. Morris was one.
Mike Little. Did you know him? No. Mike Holland.
Holland, yes.
Holland.
Mike Holland, definitely.
Was George Clark part of the group too?
I don't think he was.
Okay.
And only because he really
wasn't. There was David Smith. They call him Bulldog.
Bulldog Smith.
I think he was one of the donors.
He was. And I have all that upstairs.
Okay.
But the number 12 is important in Special Forces. That's an A team.
Oh, really?
Although with a lot of officers on it, it was a little over top heavy. As an A
so
team.
What's the importance of number 12? I didn't know.
12 people on an A team.
A team?
Yeah, the basic core structure.
Oh, okay. What is an A team? Sorry.
It's a team in Special Forces that operates independently.
Oh, that's where you pick the 12.
Right.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. What I have found is I have probably been very lucky in my life, but the things that I try to do are also things that my fellow veterans are interested in doing.
Oh, okay.
So when I tell somebody I'm going to do that, the likely approach is, that's a good idea, I want to contribute. Okay. For example, the new book that I've just put out has 30 different authors in there. And when I called them up and I said, I want you to write about this, which is your specialty, they didn't argue with me. They said, when do you want it?
They wanted that too. Okay.
So, that is not something that I did, but it's rather that what I want to do is what other people want to do.
Okay. But you took the charge, or you started it to organize it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you.